Behind the heavy golden doors of the royal residences, a quiet revolution has taken place, leaving Queen Camilla completely blindsided and stripped of the future influence she had spent decades trying to build. This was not a gradual handover of duties or a subtle realignment of public appearances scheduled to take place over the next 10 years. Prince William and Catherine sat down, carefully analyzed the long-term structure of the monarchy, and effectively wrote Camilla out of every major operational decision that dictates the future of the British crown. What makes this shift so devastating for Camilla is not just the swiftness of William's action, but the agonizing realization that King Charles had been fully aware of this master plan for months and deliberately kept her in the dark. Imagine dedicating 40 years of your life to surviving public hatred, press scrutiny, and internal hostility, believing you had finally secured your rightful place at the pinnacle of power, only to discover that your own husband signed off on an agreement that completely sidelines you without offering a single word of warning. The entire confrontation ignited when Prince William decided to establish a permanent and legally binding constitutional role for Princess Charlotte. William was adamant that his daughter should not grow up to be a mere ornamental figurehead limited to cutting ribbons and posing for balcony photographs. Instead, he designed a formal structure declaring Charlotte as the official royal guardian of the crown. Under this proposal, Charlotte would possess full legal standing to support Prince George, represent him during national emergencies, oversee critical royal trusts, and serve as his primary constitutional pillar in the exact manner Princess and has served King Charles. Granting such immense responsibility to a young royal required high-level security clearance, official briefings, and permanent statutory authority. William did not ask for permission. He presented the finalized framework to Charles months prior, leaving only his signature as Charlotte's father and future king to lock it in. When Camilla eventually discovered the existence of this binding document, she did not merely express concern. She suffered an absolute breakdown behind closed doors. She stormed through her private apartments, demanding that her staff explain how an agreement of such magnitude could be executed without her knowledge, openly declaring that William and Catherine had just committed the most catastrophic mistake in modern royal history. Camilla attempted to construct a series of diplomatic arguments to dismantle the initiative. She claimed her resistance was rooted in protecting 9-year-old Charlotte from being burdened too early, preserving respect for senior royals like Princess and Prince Edward and Sophie, and preventing public confusion over the succession hierarchy. However, every single one of those arguments disintegrated upon closer inspection. Her attempt to invoke Princess and was particularly transparent. Camilla argued that elevating Charlotte ahead of royals who had dedicated 40 years of loyal service was a direct insult to Anne's legacy. Yet, it is widely known within palace walls that Camilla and Princess Anne have shared a deeply cold relationship for decades. Princess Anne has notably never curtsied to Camilla in public or private, making Camilla's sudden defense of Anne's feelings completely disingenuous, a convenient shield used to mask her personal fear of losing influence. When Camilla confronted William directly, accusing Catherine of orchestrating a power grab to control the throne from behind her daughter's back, William's demeanor turned ice-cold. He stepped closer, lowered his voice, and delivered a stern warning never to speak about his wife in that manner again. William then delivered the ultimate blow, revealing with a subtle smile that King Charles had approved the entire framework months ago without feeling the need to consult her. That revelation left Camilla speechless. Devastated and desperate, she bypassed William and requested an emergency meeting with Charles, attempting to stop the process. But before Charles could review the final draft, key details of the proposal were leaked to the press, framing Charlotte's new role as an unfair snub to senior working royals. Palace investigators traced the leak straight to an aide within Camilla's private office. Although she denied involvement, the leaked narrative matched her exact arguments word for word, leaving Charles appalled by the breach of trust. With the news leak causing immense tension across Buckingham Palace, Camilla marched straight into the king's private study to attempt a drastically new approach, hoping to neutralize William's plan once and for all. Recognizing that emotional appeals were failing, she tried to reframe the entire constitutional proposal as a major political liability for the crown. She argued that granting a young Princess Charlotte the legal right to act on behalf of the sovereign during national emergencies was far too substantial of a decision to be resolved quietly within the privacy of the royal family. Camilla insisted that a restructuring of this magnitude had to be dragged into formal parliamentary review, fully aware that involving politicians and government committees would stall the process for years, if not kill it entirely. Think about the gravity of that strategy for a moment. Camilla was fully prepared to throw the entire institution into a fierce public and political battle just to prevent a young girl from securing a future title that threatened her own influence. It was not an effort to uphold sacred royal traditions. It was a desperate maneuver to create a constitutional nightmare so massive that William and Charles would eventually surrender and abandon the initiative. However, King Charles immediately shut down her demand. He made it abundantly clear that William had already finalized his decision with his full knowledge, and he had zero intention of overruling his eldest son. But to truly understand why Prince William was fighting with such unprecedented determination, one must look back roughly 6 months to a critical afternoon that transformed his entire approach to the succession. The catalyst took place during the Commonwealth Youth Service at St. George's Hall, a massive official engagement filled with dignitaries, diplomats, and youth leaders from around the globe. Prince George was scheduled to deliver his very first major formal public address, with William standing directly beside him for guidance and support, while Charlotte and Louis were seated nearby in the front row. Minutes before George was called to the podium, he accidentally overheard 2 senior palace officials whispering anxiously behind the curtain, using troubling phrases like concerning development and not the first episode this month. In an instant, the young prince's world shattered. This was no longer typical stage fright about reciting lines in public. George became suddenly convinced that someone he loved was gravely ill, that the family was hiding the truth, and that the foundation beneath his feet was collapsing. Before George could process the shock, Prince William was urgently summoned away. A look of severe distress crossed William's face as he abruptly exited through a side door with an aide, leaving no explanation behind. It would take months for rumors to circulate that William had been rushed to handle an alarming medical emergency regarding a core family member. But in that crucial moment, young George was left standing alone on the stage with the eyes of the world upon him. The program could not be paused. Officials motioned for him to speak, and a terrified boy had to find the composure to deliver his speech without his father by his side. That harrowing experience permanently altered Prince William's vision for the future. He realized that while the monarchy had spent centuries preparing George to be king, they had built virtually no structural backup to protect him when crisis struck. If William had been incapacitated that day, George would have been completely isolated without a single sibling legally empowered to step in and share the burden. Charlotte would have sat helpless, bound by outdated protocols. Thus, the royal guardian framework was born. Not out of an appetite for power, but out of a father's desperate resolve to ensure his son never stood alone again. Camilla, blinded by her own long-standing insecurities, failed to grasp this reality. Having fought 40 years for every shred of recognition, she viewed Charlotte's new role solely through the lens of her own bitter past. When she confronted William, claiming nobody handed her anything without decades of painful sacrifice, William instantly saw through her bitterness. He recognized that her outrage had nothing to do with constitutional balance, Princess Anne, or Charlotte's age. It was entirely about Camilla's personal pain at watching a young child receive in a single signature what took her a lifetime of public humiliation to achieve. While one can acknowledge the brutal reality of Camilla's past endurance against relentless public hatred and press hostility, her demand for Catherine to feel guilty about her effortless public affection was met with unwavering composure. When Camilla pressed Catherine on whether the institution ever truly wanted her, Catherine delivered a calm and devastating truth. The institution never chose Camilla. Charles chose Camilla, and the family merely tolerated her out of loyalty to him. As the high-level family summit convened to resolve the issue, Princess Anne brought an icy clarity to the room. When Camilla attempted to guilt and over protocols, and reminded her that the future belonged to William and Catherine, bluntly stating that Camilla would not even be alive to see most of the coming decades. The high-stakes family summit ended abruptly as Camilla, overcome with humiliation and anger, stood up and walked out of the room. Later that evening, finding herself alone with King Charles for the first time all day, she poured out her heart in a desperate bid to save her standing. She asked him point-blank whether he had ever truly believed she belonged at the absolute center of the royal family, or whether he had simply needed her support until his reign was established. Charles did not answer immediately. He stared at her in silence, searching for a gentle version of the truth that would not completely shatter her spirit, but he could find none. He admitted softly that while he had loved her for decades, his personal love could never magically force the public or the institution to accept her. Camilla felt something fundamental inside her chest fracture. In a trembling whisper, she begged him to take those words back, but Charles remained silent, letting the heavy atmosphere deliver the final answer. Exactly 1 week later, another emergency briefing was convened, and the tone in the room had shifted completely. A senior royal advisor entered carrying a thick, red leather folder containing a second, far broader constitutional document. This new framework dictated the management of all major future state events, including upcoming anniversaries, Commonwealth summits, and state banquets, explicitly outlining who would lead the monarchy if Charles were forced to step back due to health concerns. Camilla reached out to inspect the proposal, but the advisor pulled the folder back before her fingers could even touch it, stating it was reserved exclusively for the king's final determination. William had already finalized the details. Catherine had given her full consent, and only Charles's signature was missing. Left alone in his study, Charles stared at the document, torn between three powerful forces: William's relentless push for modernization, Catherine's flawless execution of duty, and Camilla's decades of fiercely loyal companionship. When William re-entered the room, he urged his father to face reality, arguing that international allies and the British public required complete certainty now rather than later. When Charles questioned whether raw public popularity should dictate sacred constitutional matters, William firmly replied that while popularity should not dictate policy, blatantly ignoring the clear will of the public would cause irreversible damage to the crown's survival. Camilla burst into the room shortly after, making one last attempt to block the agreement by warning Charles that sidelining her would make his reign look purely transactional, a temporary placeholder until William took over. William instantly countered, declaring that this had nothing to do with personal glory, but everything to do with securing the monarchy for the next 50 years. Recognizing the impasse, Charles dismissed everyone except Princess Anne, free from personal bias, and delivered the ultimate counsel. She warned Charles that if he signed merely out of pressure from William, resentment would rot the family from within, but if he refused simply to shield Camilla's feelings, an untenable cloud of uncertainty would permanently cripple his reign. She reminded him that his duty was to the continuity of the crown above all personal attachments. Charles took a deep breath, picked up a pen, and looked at Camilla's name typed across the document. Without a single moment of hesitation or second thoughts, he drew a clean, decisive line directly through Camilla's name, striking her out of the succession management plan. He then dictated fresh wording specifying that Prince William and Catherine would exclusively assume all public and ceremonial duties whenever the king required support. He signed the decree on the spot. 7 days later, at a high-profile public reception, the full reality of Charles's decision manifested before the world. Catherine stepped into the grand hall first, and the atmosphere shifted instantaneously. Guests, diplomats, and charity leaders bypassed surrounding officials, eager to speak with her and catch a glimpse of the future queen. Moments later, when Camilla entered, she received only polite, distant nods and brief handshakes before the crowd naturally drifted back toward Catherine. Camilla stood practically invisible in a room full of people, a brutal public confirmation that the nation had already chosen its future. William watched the interaction quietly from across the room, later reminding Camilla that the sudden coldness was not new. It was simply the first time she was forced to see the unvarnished reality with her own eyes. That night, Charles tried to comfort Camilla, insisting that official titles and public schedules did not change their personal marriage. But Camilla delivered a line that defined the entire conflict, stating that a crown sitting on paper means nothing when the real power behind it has already evaporated. Although Camilla silently accepted the outcome in public, smiling for the cameras and maintaining flawless protocol, palace insiders know her silence is far from a surrender. Having survived 30 years of public vilification to reach the throne, Camilla possesses a resilience that few in the palace underestimate. However, the political landscape has permanently changed. King Charles has officially chosen the future over the past, signing away Camilla's influence and leaving William and Catherine as the undisputed architects of the modern British monarchy.